All right, welcome everyone for this evening's MoLeg 101, Demystifying the Missouri Legislature with PROMO, Missouri's statewide LGBTQ advocacy organization. We're excited to have all of you join us today and having conversation about really what happens in the Missouri Legislature. We are in the midst of legislative session in our state, an exciting time, but also what can be a very confusing time as we talk about advocacy across the state. We talk about pro-equality bills, anti-LGBTQ legislation. Today is the day that, just like in the title, we're here to demystify the process and explain a little bit about what PROMO is doing in the Capitol, what happens in the Capitol, and really how you can be involved in that process. And as you can see, we have an image here of the Capitol. We've added a little bit of rainbow, we add a little bit of trans pride. And I just want to reiterate, and like we always do, this is the people's house. And so here we are today really talking about, as the people, what we can do to be part of this process and making bills into laws and engaging with our legislators. So first off, just a little bit of housekeeping for those who are in the Zoom space. We have spotlights on our presenters today. However, just to make sure that everyone can hear, we will ask you to go ahead and mute yourselves. At the bottom bar on your screen, you will see a mute button. You'll go ahead and click that, and a red slash will be marked on there to make sure that you're muted. That way you can also make as much noise as you want to and no one will hear. You are welcome, if you have any questions that are pertinent to what we're talking about, please put them in the chat. The little chat button's also at the bottom. Add in those questions. We'll be able to field them for our folks today and having conversation. And then as well, we will have a separate time that is just designated for questions at the end, so you can ask all of those additional questions that maybe didn't fit in part of our presentation today. And we are just really excited to go ahead and move forward. My name is Karis Agnew. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm the field director at PROMO, and I'm located in the Springfield area. But your presenters today, I'm going to go ahead and hand it on over to them, include Stephen Eisel. He is our executive director here at PROMO and located in St. Louis. And the Honorable Jolie Justice. I'm so excited to have Jolie join us. She's a former state senator and Kansas City council person, now serves as general counsel for Truman Medical Center. So thank you, Jolie, for joining us today and giving your insight from your experience in the Capitol and really being able to let us know a little bit more about what's happening inside the building. What do some of these things actually mean as someone who has been a legislator in our state? So thank you. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to let Stephen take it away from here.
All right. Thank you, Karis, for that wonderful introduction. And certainly thank you to everyone who's joining us via Zoom, Facebook, or any other way in which you are hearing and seeing this today. I just wanted to also start first and foremost in saying that I believe it was through the Missouri Capitol that Jolie and I met originally. I think I was probably lobbying way back in the day for who knows what at that time, but I'm just really excited to be able to share space with you today and certainly talk about what goes on in that building and why it is so important and how you can even meet lifelong friends through the process. So I certainly just wanted to say that. We will first start off this evening kind of talking about what is the Missouri General Assembly. It's two chambers, obviously the House of Representatives and the Senate. We'll start with how big they are, who their leaders are, and really how they function as entities. And then we'll dive more into the process of how an idea becomes a law and how that bill goes through the process to becoming a law. And with that, I will go ahead and start us with the House of Representatives, which I believe the esteemed former senator jumped right over. So, we'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I say that I was untainted by the House. The House members say that I was not House trained. So
I love that. Yeah, well, so with the House of Representatives, just to give folks a little bit, maybe on the next slide here. So it is obviously the much larger body. And for those that don't know, I'll try and sprinkle in some factoids that may help out at a future trivia night. But I believe the Missouri legislature is the fourth largest house in the country. I believe that's right. Someone can probably fact check me on that. But there are 163 members that serve two-year terms. So they're up, every November election they're running, and those primaries are in August. They have an 8-year term limit. So both our House members and our senators have 8-year term limits. So that is 2 terms in the Senate, 4 years in the House. They represent districts that are about 37,000 Missourians each, give or take probably a few hundred there, but they are divvied up around the state of about equal size. The current partisan breakdown, as you can see, is pretty overwhelmingly Republican at this moment. So there are actually 114 Republican House representatives and 48 Democratic representatives, and that does meet the super majority threshold. So, if there was a veto or veto override attempt, they do have the numbers if it was a purely partisan vote to kind of take that over the top. I just want to also note that each member of the legislature has at least one legislative assistant, and kind of one note that I like to note for folks that do engage with the legislature is oftentimes that's going to be your point of entry. It's going to be the person that if you are in a different time in the building, that is the person you'll typically see either at the front desk or the front door to a member's office. And, you really want to build a good relationship with that person because they can be a bit of a gatekeeper. But, Jolie, I just maybe wanted to ask you about kind of what your experience was with legislative staff. I know senators, I think, get a couple more.
Yeah, I think the really key thing to know is never make an assumption about a legislative staffer ever, and always be really, really, really nice. Even if you're not met with civility, try to stay civil yourself. My legislative aide, my chief of staff in the Senate, we were able to get 2 people, which was awesome. But my legislative kind of the guy that handled all of the legislative side of things, he met with more people throughout the day than I was able to get to. And if someone was rude to him, if someone was disrespectful of me to him, he just flat out wouldn't even pass the message along to me. So it's always good to stay really tight. The other thing is, a lot of times I made assumptions about staff members that if they were working for someone who was notoriously conservative, that they might not be, good on LGBTQ issues. But a lot of times you'll find that a large number of staffers, as in any organization, you're going to find a lot of the openly LGBTQ folks in those staff positions. So you're going to find an ally sometimes in really strange places. And I would highly recommend making them your friend.
Excellent point.
That is so true. I will also say something that we saw, many of you who were in the Capitol with us last year saw that we had several staffers for senators who were quite supportive, whether they were part of the LGBTQ community themselves, just like Jolie said, or they had a family member. And yes, building those relationships with folks who work with representatives and senators every single day, that is key. Thank you for that insight.
Excellent. All right, so I want to just share, some of the folks. We'll talk about the leadership in the House, and we'll certainly talk about some of the leadership in the Senate. One note I want to make for folks that have, gone to a lobby or advocacy day with Promo in the past, or maybe you've been called on previously to help us, move something forward or defeat something negative, and we ask you to call committee chairs, or we ask you to direct your phone call to the speaker or the floor leader. What I will note is, because of term limits, these people change over quite a bit. So who we directed you to as Speaker of the House and floor leader last year are different. So some of these folks are a little bit different that you'll see here. So we've obviously have some of the leadership mentioned there, and just wanted to kind of note one thing that's kind of a difference. This may be the 102, but the Speaker of the House is actually the one that refers bills to committee when we kind of talk about that process a little bit later. And the floor leader is actually the person that manages the floor calendar and what that looks like. So they each have different roles. So sometimes those two are in better sync than other times, in different legislative sessions, we've seen those relationships sometimes break down and what that can look like. But I think as we've seen between Vescovo and Plocker, I think the two of them have a pretty good relationship. And then you'll also see the Democratic leadership on here as well. So, Crystal Quaid down in Springfield is our minority floor leader. We've got Richard Brown and Doug Clemens as well. So just wanted to highlight some of these key folks. when we talk about House committees, I have to say I was even shocked by this figure when I saw it, but there are 60 committees in the House, and this kind of runs the gamut from kind of statutory and standing committees to committees that are joint between both the House and the Senate. And then we'll also see, you know, depending on the year, special committees that pop up underneath those. So, you know, things that may be kind of a point in time where there's a handful of bills that they're working on. They'll create separate committees for those. You know, when you go to house.mo.gov or senate.mo.gov, you can start to go through what those different committees are, and you can play around with a couple of the different features and how that information gets shared. But you will definitely see the chair and the vice chair, which, you know, with the Republican leadership now, are both Republicans. And then there will also be a ranking minority member who is kind of the point of contact for, you know, at this point, the Democratic caucus within those committees. I did want to note that committees can range in size pretty dramatically. So I think some of our smaller committees go down to as small as like 4 or 5 people. And then I believe the largest one, which is budget, has 31 members. And then you'll start to see the partisan breakdowns of those committees generally mirror kind of the overall body itself. The budget committee is unique as they work with the budget that was initially drafted by the governor, and passing the budget is really the only constitutional obligation of the legislature. So just kind of one note to make there as well. Jolie, we may talk about this in a minute, but one of the questions I know that I didn't fully understand for some time, and something I think people might wonder is, you know, things go through one committee and then there's this other committee called the Rules Committee, and there's a couple different versions of that. You know, what can be said about that process or that quirk maybe in the process?
And that's one of the things that can be confusing because it can also change chamber by chamber and leadership group to leadership group. And so you can bring in new leadership in the House and they can make rules changes. And then all of a sudden, all the rules that we thought we were following and that we understood are just gone overnight. And so a lot of times what you need to know is whether you're on the House side or the Senate side, there's one more stop that has to take place. So on the House side, for instance, you have to stop at the Rules Committee before you can get to the floor. And it's just one more hurdle you have to overcome when you're trying to pass legislation. The good news is it's one more hurdle that you can throw up when you're trying to kill legislation. So that's always nice on our side, because I feel like oftentimes we're on defense more than on offense. But on the Senate side, there's similar type things, and we'll talk a little bit on how the bill becomes a law. But just know that even if you have a cute little cartoon of how a bill becomes a law that you get when you walk in the Capitol, there's sometimes things left off of that. And the Rules Committee on the House side is one of those. And they basically, in the U.S. House of Representatives, they would be setting things like how long you get to speak on each bill and that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Really appreciate that. Yeah, I know I printed myself off the kind of cheat sheet in case we got any stumper questions later that is about 4 or 5 pages long that just kind of talks through the process. So I always joke with people that what you learned in School of Rock is not necessarily how the process kind of looks at the state level for sure. Well, I think we can probably go ahead and move on to the Senate just to talk a little bit about what those folks look like and some of the differences. You know, I will say, because there are 163 House members, you know, we don't know who every single one of them is at all times. And honestly, like, they don't all know each other. So you start to get a better sense of folks, you know, who your own representative is, who different committees that, you know, depending on what your interest is. You know, there are different committees that have more likely to hear LGBTQ bills. So I will say that there's some that we focus on a little more than others. So on the Senate side, though, I think they all know each other pretty well. And I'm sure Jolie can probably share some stories that would be really interesting to folks on this call. But, you know, there's 34 senators, so quite a bit smaller. You know, if you look at the chamber, like in the House, they're all kind of crammed together, even in COVID-19 times. You know, we can talk more about that later. But on the Senate, they do get a little more space and more opportunity to talk and really become, I think, more collaborative in their conversations with each other. So it's interesting to see just how the House and Senate dynamics are different, and what are the opportunities as we try and, you know, push positive legislation or stop against negative, what those entry points are, and where those kind of log jams can be a benefit to us sometimes. So on the Senate side, again, it's 4-year terms. So you can serve 2 terms in the Senate for a total of 16 total if you were to do the full House and Senate. They represent about 174,000 Missourians. So again, quite a bit larger. The partisan breakdown right now is 24 Republicans and 10 Democrats. So in the same way that there's a supermajority in the House, there's the same kind of environment in the Senate. So wanted to note that for folks. And Jolie, I don't know if it was you or someone else, I remember referring to it as the minivan caucus sometimes, that everyone could fit in a minivan, but I think we're a little bigger than that now.
We are now. There was a time when I think I was just elected as minority leader, and there were only 7 of us. So it was a small but mighty group. And the thing that was interesting about that is the number of committees was still the same, and you had to have Democratic membership on each committee. And so all of us were doing like double, triple, quadruple duty. I was serving on 23 committees at the same time because we had to have Democratic representation on each of them.
Oof, that's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just wanted to make one note too, is we've also, this happens from time to time, but I know that, Greg Razor, who's now senator in the Kansas City side, his chief of staff came over from the House, was a rep in the Columbia area. So, you start to get to see some of those different dynamics emerge. And I know I was going to ask Jolie, you in a little bit here, kind of where those different levers of power are, knowing that we have term limited legislators,
right,
and kind of what that looks like. But before we jump there, I'll just kind of note some of the leadership in the Senate. So some of the names that you'll start to see if you follow Promo's Equality Weeklies or legislative updates, you'll start to see some of these names probably pop up more often than others. So instead of having a Speaker of the House, you have the Senate President pro tem. The Lieutenant Governor kind of presides over in an official capacity, but Senator Dave Schatz is kind of the one who is the kind of figurehead for the Senate. And then Caleb Rowden kind of in that same dynamic between Speaker and Majority Leader. You have that dynamic play out on the Senate side. And so we have those 2, and then we have Bill White as Assistant Majority Floor Leader there. And then you'll see the 2 Democrats, Minority Floor Leader Rizzo, who I believe is from the Kansas City area, and Brian Williams, who's kind of the University City, St. Louis County area here on this side. I say this side, I'm in St. Louis, so that's why I say that. But Jolie, I was just kind of curious, as someone who I believe was a minority leader in the Senate, how was the different dynamics in the Senate? What was the relationship between, you at that time and, the majority party?
It changes depending on who's in those individual roles. But, when a Senate is functioning at its best, it is there to slow down some of the kind of nutty things that can come out of the House. And that usually happens when you have majority leadership who are willing to have a civil working relationship with the minority. And I think that's key. So let me give you just one quick example. I was in the Senate when we were able on a national level to pass the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. And of course, that was much hated by many of the majority members at the time. And it was so hated, as a matter of fact, that one of them was carrying a bill that said if any state employee attempts to even think about or start pre-planning anything to do with the Affordable Care Act, that it was a jailable offense. They were going to have to go to jail for talking to the federal government about implementing this healthcare. And I had the majority leader come to me and just whisper in my ear and say, I got to give this guy some floor time, but I don't want it to pass. So will you stand up and filibuster it for the next couple of hours so that I can say I gave him some time to talk? That's a great example of how he trusted me enough that I wasn't going to try any funny business. I got to stand up and speak poorly of all of this for 2 hours straight, or about whatever I wanted to talk about. And they were able to let that bill die a death that it needed to die. So it's when things are working well, you can have situations like that. And I think it really played out And I think it was 2014 or 13 when we first passed Mona out of the Senate, because we were able to get it out when we had Republicans stand up and vote with us and vote yes on it. And it was because of that type of relationship that we had.
And one note on that specific vote, I believe our governor at that time was a vote in favor of Mona. So, you know, we are going to continue to keep that moving forward. And, you know, hopefully with him in the governor's mansion, when we get it there, he'll sign it.
I hope so. I mean, it was one of those things where there were people there that were extraordinary ultra conservatives, and the only reason they voted yes on it was to get another bill passed. I basically cut a deal that told them that they could have a charcoal tax credit in Southwest Missouri if I could have this passed. And so there were some who just voted yes for that. There were others who admitted they did it because it was the right thing to do. And I think the governor that's currently in office was probably somewhere in both camps, frankly. Highly motivated, but thought it was the right thing to do.
Well, I think, you know, we kind of talked about it just a moment, but in the Senate side, you know, we have 20 committees. So again, significantly smaller, although it sounds like a lot more work having been on 23 committees. I hope that's a record, but yeah, so each committee has a chair and a vice chair, and then the sizes of the committees range from 5 to 14. So you don't have a kind of massive committee in maybe the same way that the budget is, but you know, 14 members there. Maybe we can pivot a little bit to the timeline of legislative session. So I believe we're about 7 to maybe 8 weeks into legislative session for this year. But just to let folks know that you can actually start pre-filing bills December 1st. So you have about 5 weeks before legislative session actually starts. When people, you know, maybe they ran on an issue and they've started talking to drafters about what those could look like in legislative language. So we'll start to see some of those bills drop as early as December 1st to give us an idea kind of where people are thinking and how that process is moving. Session started this year on January 6th. It always starts the first Wednesday after the first Monday, I believe is the way that that's written in statute. And then I believe it's the first Friday after the second Monday is when the session ends in May. So typically around that kind of May 15th timeframe, I believe this year we have it on there as May 14th. Last day to file legislation is the 60th day of the session, which I believe is March 1st this year. So we do get to the point within the legislative calendar where people cannot file new legislation. So people are continuing to file new legislation, which if you're following Promo's legislative tracker, you know, you'll get updates on that as to when things are filed and how they move through the process. But the legislature itself generally meets from Monday through Thursday. So, you know, committee hearings will start on Monday and we'll go through Thursday. As you get later on in the legislative session, I think it goes from Monday to Friday, Monday to Saturday, you know, maybe even around the clock. But this year, there's always a spring break that's kind of a little past halfway through legislative session. So you get a little bit of a break on the back end, but again, you're starting to go longer into the week at that point. So we've got that still scheduled as far as I know, the third week of March or third week of March, maybe this year. So pending any more snowstorms or any other, you know, outbreaks or things like that that could shut it down, but that's currently on the calendar. And again, yes, schedule may continue to change due to COVID-19 or weather like this week. Yes, the Senate was out this week, the whole week. The House was out Monday and Tuesday, came back Wednesday and Thursday. I think the Senate has had 2 COVID-19 outbreak shutdowns, and I think the House had 1. So we're yet to kind of see exactly what that might look like going on, but we will keep you updated as far as that goes. Jolie, are you happy you didn't have to worry about that when you were in the building?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would be in a hazmat suit if I was down there right now, just straight up. So.
Well, we will just take one quick detour to talk about the executive branch, because obviously it has a role to play when it comes to legislation being passed. So, you know, Governor Parson and Lieutenant Governor Kehoe are kind of 2 folks in leadership right now. You know, Governor Parson is the final stop for a bill to become laws. He can sign the bill, he can veto the bill, he cannot take any action on the bill in which it goes to the Secretary of State and becomes law without his signature. And then the fourth thing that can happen is only on budget bills, but there is a line item through the budget. So the governor does have that power. Lieutenant Governor Kehoe is the only member of the executive branch who also serves in the legislative branch as the Senate president. Much like the vice president on the federal level, Lieutenant Governor Kehoe can break ties in the Senate, if one were to happen, and can also engage in floor debate. So Jolie, a question for you here, as someone that was in the Senate for all 8 years, I believe. What was your relationship with the executive branch? Like, how do the two branches kind of talk to each other during legislative session?
Sure, there's definitely a good way to do it and a bad way to do it, and it's a really delicate dance for the governor's office, because if they hang out too much among the legislators, everyone feels like they're looking over their shoulder. It's annoying. Get out of here. This isn't your job. But if they're completely disconnected and never checking in, there's also a frustration, because what will happen is you can have a governor, even from your own party, swoop in at the last moment and say, I don't like this bill for the following 10 reasons. And you're just kind of sitting there with your hands in the air saying, well, where were you for the last 10 weeks as we were trying to negotiate this? So it's a really tough situation for, I think, a governor to figure out what the sweet spot is. I don't know really what the is happening in Jefferson City right now, other than what I see in the newspaper, which it looks like there may be a little, difficult relationship between the House and the right. And that's only what I read in the paper. So that's what it appears. I will tell you how critical it is, though, especially with some of the governor's cabinet members, because while we focus a lot during this time of year on passing legislation, a lot of the legislation that gets passed, there's then rulemaking, and it's implemented by the governor's cabinet members. So a lot of times the issues that we have fought for with promo, either for or against, started out as something that was a non-issue in the legislative process. But then you've got kind of an overzealous advocate at the bureaucracy level who tries to pass a rule that is not fair. And so you're really reaching out to the executive branch off session, trying to talk to them about problems, trying to convince them to veto bills. And so it's really critical to have someone in that office that you can reach out to on a regular basis to at least get timely information to.
Perfect. Thanks. All right. How bills get started. So this is a question that I know I did not know the answer to for some time in the legislative process. I was amazed sometimes. I was like, how do lawmakers have time to write all of these laws? Do you want to talk about kind of the initial step when someone has an idea, how that actually makes itself into language that most of us may not be able to understand, but legislators have to?
There's 2 or 3 different ways. And when a legislator writes a piece of legislation themselves, I think that it's not a good thing, usually. Like, most of the legislation written directly by legislators probably doesn't end well for anybody. And that's why there's this amazing nonpartisan staff that is in both chambers, both the House and the Senate. And it's really kind of great relationship, because I can either have a constituent come to me and say, I have an idea, I think this would be a great idea, or I had something that I campaigned on, and I can take those ideas to these nonpartisan legislative staffers, and they actually turn it into legislation. So they know where in the code of statutes that it needs to be put. They know how to avoid constitutional issues, all of those sorts of things. And then oftentimes we have advocacy groups like a promo or a trade organization who will bring us an actual draft of a piece of legislation and say, here's what we want to do, here's what it looks like. And then I can take that to the nonpartisan staffer, and they can turn it into a Missouri version of a bill. I think that's critical, because they can also help you avoid things. They're terribly nonpartisan, and they're also highly confidential. So if I'm working with the staffer on something, he's not going to tell another senator that I'm working on that issue. It's just between the two of us. And so that's a confidential, almost like attorney-client privilege. But I did know there was one staffer in the House when I was there who, while he remained nonpartisan, he had a little chart down at the bottom of his desk that said, how many days since he'd been asked to draft a non-constitutional bill, because you don't have to follow their advice. So oftentimes you have legislators who come in and say, here's this great idea, draft it for me. And they say, you know, sorry, Senator, it's unconstitutional. And the senator says, I don't care, draft it anyway. And so they have to do that. And then they hand it over to you, and then you take it to the floor, and, you know, this is loopy, sorry. So, but yeah, that's kind of how it works. And it's really great, but you have a lot of people out in the community too. You can hire a lawyer to draft it for you. You can just put it in yourself. And like I said, those are usually the worst.
That's helpful. Yeah. And I love that context and the story behind it. So the representatives and senators, as I said before, are able to start pre-filing those bills rather, excuse me, December 1st through the 60th day of session. After filing, the bill is given a number. So, you know, starts, you'll notice House bills, I think it's 1 through 20, 25-ish, are budget only bills. So then they kind of jump after that. So you'll start to see House bills, and they go in numerical order of when they were filed. And when a bill is given a number, it's read first and read twice. So you'll kind of see this kind of mysterious thing that shows up as first read and second read, and really just means it's entered the formal process. And then has the opportunity to then kind of be referred by either on the Senate side, it's the floor leader who does, actually, it's the leader, right? On the Senate side.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And then the House Speaker on the House side. So the bills also have some different numbers that folks might see. So you'll see like HB and SB, or House bill and Senate bill. And then you'll start to see, and I think Jolie will probably talk a little bit more about some of the other letters that start to emerge in the process. But one thing I wanted to ask as well, Jolie, is just as things kind of move from that first read to second read, you know, what opportunity is there at that point? Is that like an opportunity to reach out to the speaker or, you know, the Senate leader and say, like, this is an issue that's really important. Can we get this bill referred to a committee?
Yeah, this has changed a lot, just so you know, as civility has eroded in the Capitol. And frankly, it has probably more to do with term limits than it does even with lack of civility in the dialogue, because the relationships aren't as strong as they used to be. When you had men and women who worked together for 20 years, they were more willing to just automatically refer something to a committee and no questions asked. It just went and you got. But now, you second, because the pro tem holds the list of bills and doesn't even read them. Some other. Absolutely, that's a very good way to impact your legislation. So if you have a piece of legislation that you think would fare better, you can ask your senator or House member to request a specific committee that it be sent to.
Excellent. And I think one other question we had kind of on this piece is when a fiscal note gets introduced, you know, does that sway people kind of one direction or the other, and kind of what does that, you know, process maybe look like?
Yeah, a couple of things. When a fiscal note comes in, it basically tells you how much this bill is going to cost once implemented. And they ask not only the state bureaucracies that are supposed to implement the legislation, but they also go to local governments and that sort of thing and get the information. A lot of times, if you have a bureaucrat who does not want your bill to pass, they will put an inflated fiscal note just so it will look bad. And so you can actually contest that as a legislator. And it doesn't take, I think, more than a simple vote on the floor to do it. Or maybe it's just writing a letter. I don't even remember that one. But I will tell you that was something I did every now and again when I felt I had someone from the Department of Health who was trying to stop something just because they didn't want to do it. And the other thing that's important about fiscal notes is it can impact how it gets out of the chamber. So on the Senate side, if it's over $100,000, it has one more committee stop before it goes to the full floor.
Excellent. All right. Well, do we want to move on over to committees?
I have a quick question, if that's okay. Jolie, you mentioned really quickly earlier about a bill dying a death. It died. I just want to highlight, we talk about how a bill can be referred to committee. Mm-hmm. Does it die if it doesn't go to committee? Is that its death?
Well, it dies if it doesn't get to a committee by 6 p.m. on that day in May. And so what you need to know about the Missouri legislative session is that bills that are introduced, a clock starts ticking the day that they're introduced. And if they are not truly agreed to and finally passed by 6 p.m. on that last day of session, then they're dead and you have to start over from scratch the next year. So if something is never referred to committee, yeah. Now, if something's referred to committee and you can't get a hearing, there are some rules that you can, if you have enough votes, to pull something out of a committee and get it referred somewhere else, which I've seen happen. But if it's never referred, there's really nothing you can do about it.
Perfect. Thank you. Oftentimes, I think at Promo, we've discussed with folks about a bill dying and where it dies and how it dies. And I think a lot of us have questions about what does that really mean? Because it's just a bill. How does it die? And that can look a little bit different in different state legislatures. So thank you. I know you mentioned a death on the floor, kind of wanted to be able to talk about a potential death before it even makes it to committee.
And I think I teach a class on this, or I used to at the law school here in town, and I call these veto gates, but these are all the things you have to clear in order to get a bill passed. And there are so many places that if you are trying to stop a bill, it can be really, really easy because there are so many places. I mean, and on the Senate side, and we haven't even gotten to this point yet. I mean, even if you get a bill voted out of committee, you could have a committee chairman refuse to report it to the floor and just hold on to it. And so there are lots of places. And when I say die, I mean that specific bill and that number, they're not going anywhere, but nothing stops you from offering it as an amendment to another bill. And I often referred to some bills that I wanted to die that came back as zombies, because I thought we had killed finally a bill, and then I'm standing on the floor and someone hands me a Senate substitute, and basically a bill handler has taken a bill that we all thought was dead and substituted his current bill for that bad bill. And so then we have to start all over again.
That's a really great example. And the only real issue there is just making sure that if you tack on that amendment to another bill of one that we thought died, the only issue is that it has to be germane, correct?
Well, yeah, it's supposed to. But
what does that mean for folks who aren't sure what germane means?
So there is a Missouri Supreme Court case from a long time ago that says you cannot put two different types of legislation in the same bill. So one example would be a DWI bill cannot bring in and ban strip clubs at the same time. And that's a bill, that's an actual issue that we had years ago. And so that is, that's the note. It has to be a single subject. But then if the bill was originally a bill about education, you can't put something related to DWI in there. Okay, my dog's having fun now. I apologize. But you can't put, the bill in that has nothing to do with education. And so if you want to try to keep these things off of your bill, one good thing to do is make sure it's very narrowly titled and tailored so that you can't let other people squeeze onto your bill.
That's a great tip. Okay, are we ready to move on to see what happens in committee, Stephen?
Yeah, I think we are. Great. Yeah. So as we said before, like once the leadership in both the House and the Senate refer a bill to committee, it's then really in the hands of committee chairs to decide what that next step looks like. So a bill can be assigned for public hearing, and that is something we start to see pretty early on in the calendar year. We start to see hearings pop up, which is really one of the key points. And this is an area where, us at Promo, we really make sure to let people know when these hearings are coming up, knowing that sometimes we get these notices that Thursday and Friday for the next week, but there's only a 24-hour notice that has to go out before one of these hearings pops up. So again, we hope that you're following our information, follow us on Twitter and Facebook, also follow our legislative tracker, because that is how we can keep people up to date on these things as they move pretty quickly through the process. Jolie, this is kind of where I think I'd pass it to you again to just kind of talk a little bit about kind of what committee process looks like, what the relationship is between members on committees, and just how can, the public really engage in kind of this space.
Absolutely. And the committee process is incredibly important, especially when you're trying to educate legislators on issues that they maybe don't have the right information, or it's an issue of first impression. And so there were some years when I felt it was a huge victory if I could just get a committee hearing so that I could bring in experts or community. Sorry about that. I'm trying to do something to keep the dog from being distracting, and then apparently it's all fallen apart all at once. So I apologize. So anyway, one of the things that you can do is you can absolutely use that to teach people for the very first time. And even if you never get a vote on it, you've at least gotten your day to go to the Capitol. And I know it's a little bit different with COVID and it's a little more difficult right now, but you've had your day to go to the Capitol and explain your story, tell your story. And I think that's really critical. And so one of the things that you might want to spend a lot of time doing in a bill's infancy is just trying to get it referred to a committee and getting a hearing. That's a victory sometimes. And so there were years when I would go and I would beg for one of my bills to have a committee hearing, and I wouldn't get the hearing and I wouldn't get the hearing. And finally the chairman would say, okay, fine, Senator, but we're not going to vote on it this year. I'd say, fine, I just want my hearing. And then, next year I'd get a hearing, and the year after that I'd get a vote. One thing that you need to know is the average time it takes to pass even the most simple, non-controversial bill is 3 years. So I would say that the committee process is really key. And then a couple of things that are really heartbreaking for folks, even if you have a committee hearing, sometimes they don't vote on it. Once you get a vote on it, it could die, like you said, in the Rules Committee on the House side. On the Senate side, it could die because the committee chair won't give it to the, won't get it to the floor, won't, deliver it to the floor. And I didn't understand that when I first got elected, but essentially the floor leader will only accept a certain number of bills a session. And so if your bill is not prioritized on the Senate side, it dies once again. But that's when I've got copies of it as an amendment, and every bill that even seems kind of relevant, I would jump up and offer my amendment. So one thing, if you ever talk to a legislator and say, I don't think I can get this passed, but I can offer it as an amendment, that's just as good. I passed dozens and dozens and dozens of bills, and I bet all but a handful of them were because I offered amendments.
Mm-hmm. Really important for us to consider, because it's also an opportunity for us to see what those opportunities are for our proactive bills. And certainly it requires us to monitor so many different bills where some of these negative attacks, we saw some of these last year, and certainly want to be watching out for them again this year. So let's say there's been a public hearing and they came back and did an executive session and they decided to vote do pass. So then we move on to the floor, either of the House or the Senate. What at that point does that kind of process look like when we talk about this unusual term that then starts to pop up, the perfection calendar and informal calendar? Can you tell us a little bit about what some of those words mean?
Yeah, talking about where bills go to die, the informal calendar is often the place where they go to die, but that's also where zombies hang out. So just, you have to be careful there. You might think something's gone there and then all of a sudden it pops back up. So when things go on the perfection calendar, they have to go in that order. So, bills get assigned numbers and that's how you track them throughout the session. But once they're out of committee, it's the order that they're on the perfection calendar that matters. So if something's at the top of the perfection calendar, you can't pull up a bill that's lower than it on the calendar to go ahead of it. You actually have to go through all those bills above it first. And remember, we're on this huge time, rush, because everything ends at 6 p.m. on that Friday in May. And so one of the things that becomes very valuable the later you get in the year is the time that you're allowed to speak on the floor. And so that's when your relationship with the floor leader becomes incredibly important in both chambers, because the floor leader decides how long something's on the floor, when you're going to pull it, whether you'll bring it back. And so one of the things that a lot of good legislators will do is try to make friends with the floor leader, or try to make friends with someone who's friends with the floor leader, so that you can pull in some favors now and again. But that's a really key relationship. That person really calls all the shots after the bill leaves committee.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I know that you've talked a little bit about amendments being such a key strategy in terms of moving legislation. What does the process maybe look like? And, for those of us that try and follow along with what's going on in Jefferson City, like, how can we monitor, and like how many different maybe layers of amendments can be tacked onto a bill?
Oh, that's a great question. The Senate rule was, I think you couldn't go past the third degree. So you couldn't have an amendment to an amendment to an amendment. You couldn't go beyond that. Frankly, that is such like insider baseball that stuff usually just happens when you've got some sort of flat out floor fight. But you do need to know that if you're trying to get something on a bill, and someone opens up the area of law that you want to get in there, that's the time you have to act, because you cannot amend previously amended material. And so this is really insider stuff, but this is the time that you want to be close with the legislative aides. And and on the House side, it's not quite as fast acting, because on the House side, unless they've changed it, you have to show your amendments like 24 hours in advance and all that kind of stuff. They were making that.
I think so. No,
Okay.
I don't think that's the case anymore. Yeah.
That was one of those special rules they changed when I was still down there. And so we just kind of wrote off the House when it came to amendments. On the Senate side, I mean, you can just go all night. I mean, part of our strategy when we were trying to stop bills is we'd sit there and offer 100, 200 amendments just to slow the piece of legislation down. But one of the things that you need to do is, if you are close with one of the legislative aides, you can be texting that person saying, this would be a great place to offer this bill. Can you have it drafted and get ready for the senator or the House member to try to offer it when this bill comes up? So it's really a great strategy. Knowing though that you can only put it on pieces of legislation that it's relevant to. But also knowing that the majority party will break that rule. So.
All right. So let's say a bill has gone to the floor. They've offered amendments. Some have been voted up, some have been voted down, and it goes to then what is called third reading and final passage. Can you tell us a little bit about how that differs from the conversation that happens around the amendments and perfection?
Absolutely. So the perfection process is when you can do all of the amending, but after you've had the perfection vote, there are no more amendments. So the final vote is the third read, and there's no way to change the wording after that in your own chamber. So if you've got a bill that's a Senate bill, it's been perfected, it's got to go through a couple of other processes where and there's room for shenanigans there, even, believe it or not, especially with a super majority. But for the most part, once something's been perfected, it then goes on the third read calendar. A lot of times the third read calendar isn't even called until a Thursday. So a lot of things happen on Thursday. But you go through that, and that's just an up or down vote. And in the Senate, it's really interesting because that's every individual has to vote yay or nay by voice, because we don't have buttons on the Senate side. On the House side, everybody has to push a button and says yes or no. And I think for some reason the House may have a present option, or,
they do. I was going to say, sometimes we'll see legislators put up a picture of the board because they have the little screen on everybody's desk it's the green votes, the red votes, and then you'll see some yellow presence or absence. Yeah.
We didn't have that in the Senate. If you were in the chamber, you had to vote yes or no. I mean, you didn't get any other vote. There's no pass. You have to take a stand. Now you can leave the room, which a lot of people did. But and sometimes, just so you know, that's a good strategy. If you have a senator who's you need them to vote no on something, but they don't want to say it out loud, they'll take a walk And that's the same as a no, because their vote isn't there to vote yes. So
Yep.
you could use that as a strategy.
Yeah,
But
and I believe it was one of the marriage bills, or it was the marriage bill, I believe, last year. And Karis can probably correct me if I'm wrong on the House side, that it was, I believe, someone that walked out of the vote that created a tie that caused that bill to fail to move forward.
oh, that's
And-
interesting.
And that's when it died in rules.
Mm.
There you go. So there's always
That's why we need to know all these pieces when we're talking about this.
I know. And it can get really exciting. I used to be more of a sports fan before I started doing this legislative stuff. And this just completely took over, because there's a lot of just, scorekeeping, and it's a big game of, chess essentially. So, but that being said, one of the things that you're right, once you get through the third read process, it's just an up or down vote, and then it's done, except that the House, the Senate has this government accountability and fiscal oversight. So you're going to have one more stop in that committee before it can go to the House if it's more than $100,000 that's impacted. And the thing that stinks about it is it's more than $100,000 that you're spending or earning on behalf of the state. It's the weirdest thing. And so that's one more place. I had a bill that I took 3 years to get through the Senate. And the third year, I finally got a vote and got it out. And then the one guy who kept voting no on it, he was the chair of that governmental accountability and fiscal oversight, which I called GAFO just to piss everyone off. And I shouldn't say that, sorry, bad language. But anyway, he killed the bill there because, so next year I had a different fiscal note ready to go and it passed out without going to him. So those are some of the things you can do. But anyway, then it goes to the House side or the Senate side. And the thing you have to know is if it left the House one way, came to the Senate, and they made even one change, even a comma, it has to go back to the House again. Mm-hmm. So that's another way to mess up someone's legislation, is if a really bad bill comes from the House and you're trying to stop it, if you can get a senator to get an amendment on it, it's going to have to go back to the House before it can go to the governor. And so that's a really, really good way to slow something down.
So do you want to talk maybe, I think this is the kind of last piece on this process, is if something does then have to go to the conference committee, have you, been a part of those before, and kind of what does that process sometimes look like?
Yeah, so a few things you need to know. First of all, if the House sends something to the Senate and the Senate changes it, two things can happen. The Senate can send it back and the House can just pick it up and pass it and say, okay, fine. And so be really careful when you do that. People have gambled with that before and it's had bad results. For instance, a bad bill will go from the House to the Senate. The Senate will make it worse, thinking that they'll send it back to the House and the House will fix it. And then the House will call their bluff and say, forget it, we're passing it anyway. And then you have a really, really bad bill instead of just a really bad bill. And so you have to be careful if you've got a strategy of changing things around. So the other way that it can happen is the House can say, we're not going to accept your change, but we're going to send it to a conference committee. And then you have majority and minority members from each chamber who are appointed to that. Know this, though, that the majority doesn't even have to hold the conference committees. A lot of times they just send around the piece of paper and sign it. And they don't even have that deliberative process where they actually sit and try to work things out. That usually happens when it's a partisan type vote and you've got all of the majority party agreeing on something. But if you've got something where it's not along partisan lines, usually it's like an insurance thing or cable versus telephone companies, just that kind of stuff, where you're going to have Republicans and Democrats on each side. They'll actually sit down and have a conference committee, and then there'll be a vote. And that is another time that you can try to have your voice heard. Those are supposed to be held in public under the Sunshine Law, and you have to kind of really hold folks accountable to make sure that it happens. And then once the conference committee does their report, they send it back, and the chambers have to adopt those as well. So that's another opportunity if you're trying to stop something, to try to stop it at that level.
Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, I think we mentioned the 4 things that the governor can do. So Karis, do I want to maybe pitch it to you to talk about some of the important things we're tracking and how tonight's conversation fits into the other conversations that we'll be having in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. You all have really, this was wonderful in being able to shed some light on the process. I don't know about the folks who are attending and viewing in the live stream today, but it can feel overwhelming. And I'm sure it felt overwhelming entering the Senate and learning all of the rules and all of the different opportunities for bills to pass or die, as we've talked about. So there are certain things to know to track when it comes to advocacy and any legislation you care about. But obviously your friends here at PROMO, we're going to talk about pro-equality legislation and then making sure we're tracking and opposing the anti-LGBTQ legislation. So first, tracking that legislation. We actually have a tracker on our website through Fast Democracy where we have every single bill that we as PROMO are watching. We make notes next to it, whether it's an anti-bill or a pro-equality bill. And on that tracker, it'll say where it is. Is it in committee? Has it been read for a second time? Did it pass out of committee? And it will also alert you when a hearing is scheduled, which makes it really easy because, as folks already said, they only have a 24-hour requirement to give notice for a committee hearing to make sure that you have the opportunity to provide testimony or take action. Obviously in committee, as Jolie said, that's one of the most vital times for a bill, and engaging with committee members, engaging with your own legislator about legislation as well. So make sure, know where your legislation is. So then that way you know who to engage. If the piece of legislation you're tracking is in committee, you want to speak to committee members, even if they aren't your own legislator. Once it gets passed out of committee and it goes to the floor, then contact your representative if it's on the House floor, or contact your own senator if it's on the Senate floor. So you'll want to know where it is so you know who to talk to. Like I said, our tracker has all of that information. And then keep track of the chairs of committee. Even like I said, if your legislator does not sit on the committee that a bill you care about is in, still engage the people who are on that committee, and especially the chairs. Like we talked about, the entire future of a bill within committee is really up to the chair of whether or not they'll schedule the public hearing or executive session. So keep track and know who the chairs of committees are. And I know that Shira has popped into the chat, for those of you who are in the chat in the Zoom, our legislative tracker, and you can just go ahead and subscribe there. And that'll give you all the updates and everything like that. And I know that we're really close to time. We said we'd be here from 6 to 7, but I also want to honor that you all probably have questions. There's so much to this process and how a bill becomes a law. There's so much to specifically the Missouri legislative process. So we want to be able to still give you that time if you're able to continue to be with us to ask those questions. Especially since we are, here together, knowing that we have much to go during legislative session. We have many things that we're going to continue to talk about in legislative updates. Stephen, I think I forwarded you a question in the chat. If you want to go ahead, and we will take chat questions, or if you want to raise your hand at the bottom bar of your Zoom, we do actually have the opportunity to raise your hand, and we are happy to unmute you and have you ask your question, get that answered.
All right, I think I see the question here. So there is so much heterogeneity among or maybe that's homogeneity between GOP and Democrats for that matter. Can you give us a sense of the breakdown in terms of the GOP reps who are fiscally conservative, but more socially liberal? And I will just kind of go ahead and maybe tackle that. So I typically categorize our folks into like 4 or 5 different camps, really. So we have our allies and champions, including those that are LGBTQ members themselves that we know are with us on every piece of legislation we're moving forward. And I think that, that's the camp that we try and make sure that they have the stories of people in our community so that they can share those with their colleagues. We have people that are generally with us in philosophy or spirit, but sometimes need the additional education and support. And that's why we do a number of different kind of community education pieces, but then also similar things for our legislators themselves. So they have a better understanding of what the impact of different pieces of legislation may mean for our community specifically. And, I don't think we noted, but there's often 2,000 to 3,000 pieces or bills each year. No one can really monitor all of those themselves. So, we may have legislators that are generally in favor of what we're working on, but don't know the bill numbers or the topics that are up in a different committee or something like that. So we kind of work with those camps. As to the GOP, because there are so many more, it does kind of vary across the spectrum. So, there are some people that are antagonistic, vitriolic towards our community, and we know that. And those are some of the folks that, sometimes even having our lobbyists, whether it's me, whether it's somebody else going and talking to those folks, can actually rile things up or make them worse. And Jolie, I don't know if you have any stories about what that process has looked like. But then we have other folks that are, small government conservative type people who are with us on the social issues, but then have to maybe deal with a party leadership that doesn't always agree. So, what are some of the opportunities? I will say, as it pertains to like Missouri Non-Discrimination Act, MONA, for example, we have 2 Republican co-sponsors of that piece of legislation right now, in addition to some Democrats that are moving that forward. So, operating in this environment, we know that it takes Democratic votes and Republican votes to make sure that our agenda is moving forward. But Jolie, definitely wanted to toss that to you a little bit as well.
Yeah, I just also want everybody to, and this is really hard to do, but just don't assume anything about anybody when you first go in to meet them. There was a senator that I served with from the Boot Heel that was extraordinarily socially conservative. As a matter of fact, in 2004, he was in the House at the time. He carried the piece of legislation that ended up putting the same-sex marriage ban on the ballot in August of that year. And so he was extraordinarily socially conservative. But in about the second or third year that I was down there, I got a frantic call from his staffer, and you'll get a kick out of this. It was promo lobby day. And they were freaking out because I heard him in my office. He said, Senator Justice, there's a gay man in the senator's office. And I said, okay, calm down. I'm on my way. So I went down to meet this gay man that was in the senator's office from the Boot Heel. And it was a promo, advocate who was there. And he was explaining to this senator that it was legal to fire someone in Missouri because they're gay. And so the senator looked at me and he said, did you know this? Is this true? And I said, yeah, it's true. And he said, well, that ain't right. And I said, I know. And he said, well, what are we going to do about it? And I got a co-sponsor of MONA right then and there, because we had a promo advocate who walked in the door and just told his personal story and didn't make an assumption that he was going to not want to hear him only, because of his background and previous votes. So I cannot stress enough the importance of, even if someone's socially conservative, really giving everyone a chance. The first time, if you're treated poorly, just don't go back. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I can just kind of tack onto that an experience that I had yesterday. So I was actually in Jefferson City providing testimony in favor of HIV modernization legislation, which had a public hearing yesterday in front of Health and Mental Health. I was actually, after the hearing had concluded, was in the hallway, having one of our staff check-ins, and one of the representatives who was in that hearing said, hey, when you're done with that call, can you come to my office? And this is someone, I won't go into names at this point, but someone who is not a friend of our community. So I was like, oh, what are we going to go in there and talk about? And I was in there with the representative and legislative assistant for 45 minutes, talking about my own personal story, coming out, what my experience was playing sports, what some of my other experiences were, and just knowing that like we can have some of those conversations that, I like to say I'm one of those people that like I can go in and have a conversation that maybe some of the other folks in our community can't. And like, what are the opportunities to do that storytelling and sharing and just like humanizing and just the power of stories, which we are going to have an entirely separate event just talking about storytelling and how you can make that a part of your legislative advocacy, and certainly how you can do that with us at Promo, because some of these folks sometimes may not vote the way we want them to, but if they don't co-sponsor a bill, they don't write a bill, they walk out of a committee meeting, there's a lot of different opportunities. As we've said, there's dozens of ways in which you can kill a bill. And sometimes just neutralizing or having somebody not be part of the conversation can also be helpful to us.
Yeah.
Speaking of events, I'm going to go ahead and jump off of that. We do have several events that are coming up. And one of those is actually this coming Tuesday, when we're going to talk about the strategies of pro-equality legislation and stopping the anti-LGBTQ legislation that's been filed thus far. Obviously, we have until March 1st for more to enter, but we will have that at 6 o'clock. And I believe we'll have a link in the chat for those of you who are interested in joining us on Tuesday. We'll be joined by Fast Democracy, which is that bill tracker that we referred all of you to, so you can see how to use the tool, see how you can engage legislators through the Fast Democracy tracker and everything like that. And we also will be having an event on March 4th to talk about testimony. So if you are interested in providing testimony for pro-equality legislation like MONA, the Missouri Non-Discrimination Act, or against anti-LGBTQ legislation with us, we are going to have an entire event on March 4th at 6 o'clock where we're going to talk about all those options for testimony. With it being a year during a pandemic, something that Jolie didn't have to worry about during session, we have a couple of different options for submitting testimony and submitting testimony safely. So we're going to talk about all of those, how to craft it and how to deliver it and make sure that legislators see that for a committee hearing. In addition, finally, right before legislative spring break, I know we highlighted that starts on March 15th. A great time to continue to build relationship with your legislator is to ask them for an in-district meeting. And ask them for an in-district meeting when you know that they're not busy with legislative session, which is legislative spring break. A great time to ask them if they're not out traveling, to just grab, get on Zoom, have a chat. I would usually say grab coffee, but you may not want to do that during these times. But have a chat on Zoom and really talk about why this is important to you. What is important to you, and learn about what's important to them. I think a question I have, Jolie, is how important were in-district meetings with your constituents while you were in the Senate?
I think they were incredibly important, and it's a great time for you to get legislators to, in the before times, take a tour or get a cup of coffee. And frankly, my advice to everybody is to adopt a legislator and do it if you can before session starts, and just get to know them and talk to them, and then have some talking points that you're going to go over with them when you do it. And that way, when you reach out to them during session, they can remember you and say, oh yeah, we met at that coffee shop on, Main Street and had that great conversation, and how's your kid doing, and blah, blah, blah. Those things are really important. And I will tell you that you can contact other legislators. I think that's fine, but nothing beats the power of you telling your personal story to your own legislator. That makes a difference. And I've also seen it a very powerful thing if your legislator is all on board. My staff used to get so mad at me because every time Promo or another progressive organization would send me a letter saying, contact your legislature, I would always type it in and then they'd have to respond to my email. And so they kind of got sick of that. But one of the things that you can do is maybe one of your parents or a cousin or a family member lives in a place that's not as progressive. Have that person contact their legislator on your behalf or on behalf of the issues. And that's very, very powerful.
Absolutely. I will highlight, I was at a Promo advocacy day, I think this was 3 or 4 years ago, where I went to my own legislator who was very favorable. And then I went to my parents' legislator, they're up in Pike County. And when we said we were with Promo, the state senator at that time, who's no longer there, refused to take a meeting with us, even though we could see the state senator sitting in their office off to the side. So what I did is, we left a note and left our card and things like that. But then I called my parents, to your point, and told them, hey, our state senator, or your state senator rather, refused a meeting with us. Maybe you could let them know how you feel about the issue and move that forward. And, I think that, like that said, there's an opportunity for us, there's an opportunity for allies and friends and family and everyone else to be engaged in the process.
It's a really great opportunity.
Thank you. And I don't see any additional questions in the chat. Does anyone have any questions? I know we're obviously a little over on time. We had a great discussion, a lot of insight. Does anyone have any questions before we close out this evening? Okay. Well, I want to thank you all on what is a very cold week. So I want to thank all of you for spending time with us, learning about the legislative process, really how you can be involved in it from start to finish and what that looks like engaging with your representative and your senator. I went ahead and I dropped it for those in the Zoom. I dropped some links here with all of our upcoming events starting on Tuesday, and then on March 4th, talking about testimony, and then on March 10th, to really talk about honing the craft that is, really building a relationship with your legislator through in-district meetings and meeting with them regularly. I would
Karis,
probably, oh, yeah.
I have a quick question about talking points around some of the anti-LGBTQ youth bills. Do you all have something like that I can find on your website, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. How do we talk about the anti-LGBTQ bills that we have? So first off, we will talk a lot about how we're talking about these bills and how to specifically advocate for or against, obviously against the anti-LGBTQ bills on Tuesday. So we'll have those for Tuesday. And Nikki, I can also get you some more information as well to follow up.
Perfect, thank you.
Of course. And shout out to Planned Parenthood. We have several Planned Parenthood staff here for just being really great partners when it comes to advocacy across the state.
Yeah, I was going to say, I see some former Promo staff. I see several faces that I've seen at lobby days and advocacy days previously. So I'm really excited about the group of people that are involved, continue to be involved, and knowing that this year obviously is different and more difficult, but we're going to help people out to figure out the best ways that they can be involved.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for a wonderful evening. If you have not already, please check out promoonline.org. You can sign up for our legislative updates, where you get legislative updates from Stephen. You also can get Equality Weekly updates from me, how to take action on Mondays. Typically, you get from on my side. So each bookend of the week. And then at PROMOmissouri, that is our handle on all social media. So if you are more likely to check social media than your email, check us out on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And we are just really thankful for all of you joining us and being part of this process.